The following video will concern propaganda and activism, laws and firearms, and not whether they do any good. And I'll give my opinion on what I think later. But we're going to talk about facts today. Federal Bureau of Investigation's criminal fingerprint background check used for a purchase permit in the state of Oregon under Measure 114, being refused by the FBI, was a lie. If you ever heard of anybody saying this, and honestly, there's only a few places on the internet that talk about it, it was never true. OregonFirearms.org, the Oregon State Police, Oregon State Sheriff's Association, and Oregon Chief of Police group. Do states' rights to regulate something violate a federal law or a constitutional right? And is this situational ethics where you only care when it affects you and you're perfectly okay with it only harming someone else? Again, do you have principles or do you have an Etch-a-Sketch with them written on it? And do you only worry about this for specific single subjects like the Second Amendment, firearms, whatever? And that goes for people who are for and against. Is it just this one subject you're willing to compromise, not just your ethics, but everybody else's? Okay. Oregon Measure 114, permit to purchase, has to come from the law enforcement in your area, state, local, city, whatever, who would then require proof that you've completed safety training and completed a mental health check or background check for mental health or a background check for criminality or other. Now, it's either very specific or very vaguely written, depending on how you look it up, depending on who said it when they were proposing it. Politicians, lawyers, judges, your defense and prosecution included with the lawyers, and lawmakers are not required to tell you the truth. There is no punishment for lying. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's virtually no instance you can cite that's real, that has a real world consequence for lying. Your likelihood of being punished for outright lying to the population in this country is nearly zero. Even if your job says it's against the rules, they just don't prosecute you unless you're placed under oath, preferably under duress, where you're trying to get out of the room. A person is qualified to be issued a permit to purchase. You can also insert concealed weapons permit, and every other kind of permit for the state of Oregon has almost the same wording. You're qualified or allowed under the rules if you're not prohibited from doing so. And I mean literally, unless there's some evidence that you shouldn't be allowed to do something, you are allowed. I know that sounds pretty fucking obvious, but this amounts to, before you even go near a gun getting to purchase it, someday it might be ammunition, before you could ever concealed carry, before you could get a permit to carry weapons of a specific variety that are considered only really useful for police or something by some people. There may be a rule like this, and all they do is, are you prohibited from touching a gun? That's the gist of it. By looking it up in any way possible. Versus, and I mean literally, is there an accusation with no evidence behind it? Well, you can't have a gun. All the way up to, were you convicted and served time? You can be a felon, but if you didn't serve time in some places, they're not going to take away your Second Amendment rights, because the Second Amendment rights for a very long time have been interpreted. This is interpreted very recently in our lifespan. This is not from the Constitution. The Constitution has always been interpreted until recently that the Second Amendment not to be an individual right. It doesn't matter if you like that. It doesn't matter if you're going to bullshit in the comments. It was not treated that way by literally any state or any federal agency. It was only treated that way by politicians who, again, We're not required to tell you the truth. They can lie to you all they want to. It's just salesmanship. If you're not prohibited from purchasing, acquiring, or possessing a firearm on a federal or state level, or just this state, or at a local level due to some local ruling, you're allowed to have a firearm, and more importantly, you're allowed to buy it. It's the same restriction. Unless otherwise noted, you are allowed to. This is called the shall issue rule. Some states require that you have enough records to look up to make sure that you are who you say you are and there's never been an accusation. That's a may issue state. They're not required to allow you to have a gun. Oregon is a shall issue. That has not changed. Methods for testing this include, but are not limited to, including but not limited to. That's not an exclusion, but an inclusion. That doesn't mean you're excluding what is going to be mentioned. That also doesn't mean you're only allowing what's mentioned. This is saying, I'm going to give you an example of a way to do a background check or whatever. Completing a criminal background check. Other examples that are used in different laws, but mention different ones. FBI background check. Police department background check because you were a cop at one time. A person who went into the military and went through a background. Basically, any source of a background check is allowed because it's prima facie evidence that a check has been done and nothing was found. If your records come back blank because you're a farm boy from a part of the state where you basically created almost no footprint, unless they can find proof, and it has to be you're innocent until proven guilty, proof that you have done something to disqualify you, they can't refuse to give you a permit to purchase or a permit to concealed carry, etc. There are exceptions. Other areas are like, well, you have to have good reason. But the state of Oregon, unless you're in a couple, like literally 3 or 4 cities, it's all shall issue. You can't tell someone no unless you have a compelling reason. Just like you can't tell someone they can't walk down the street unless there's a compelling reason to do so. And it's not a criminal act if they say no. They're just disobeying you. Disobeying an officer might get you in trouble. But the point is, it's shall issue, meaning you have a right to it. They don't say the word right, but it's in the state constitution and the federal constitution and in the bylaws or whatever you want to call it. They're all different in every city and county in the state of Oregon, except for those cities that have decided to rescind them because they've had a huge amount of gun control problems. And more importantly, yes, I phrased it that way. Sorry if you don't like it. Or more accurately, they got gang activity and they got to basically say, no, we're not going to presume that you're innocent until proven guilty all the way. If you're running around with a gun and there's no good reason to, you're going to be told to take it home. If you get snippy, you're going to go to jail until they can figure out what the hell you're doing. If you say, I'm guarding my neighborhood because there's a gang across the street and you guys haven't showed up yet, oh, okay, we have 15 calls. Okay, that's fine. And that actually happened, by the way, in Portland. So a criminal background check is mentioned. Let's go on. The department shall report the results, whatever department, police department, whatever, including the outcome of a fingerprint-based criminal background check. That's a combination of 2 or 3 sentences. That's not the exact wording, but that's what's implied by the people who lied about this. And it was both sides of the argument, by the way. The permit agent, upon completion of the criminal background check, yada yada, below, determination of whether the permit applicant, the person, is qualified or disqualified from purchasing or otherwise acquiring the firearm shall be reported to the police department or wherever you went with your paperwork. You fill out the paperwork, turn it into the nearest authorized entity, it's the police department usually, and they have to have the data go back and forth. The idea is to isolate you from this rigmarole so that nobody can interfere with it and nobody can be biased about it. You're just a bunch of numbers and data. And if they can't find anything that's demonstratively showing that you shouldn't have a gun, it shall issue. Now, I'm drilling this into everybody's head. We now have the first mention in a couple of sentences of a fingerprint-based background check, criminal background check, fingerprint-based criminal. It's all implied, okay? That's what both sides are saying that are both lying about this. Permit agent shall request a criminal background check, including but not limited to. Meaning if you say it can only be through the example brought up next, you are lying. Including, but not limited to, FBI fingerprint identification. That's identification, not a background check. That's actually the wording. That means to find out that you exist. This is also including, but not limited to, INS, going through a port authority, going through wherever you got your passport from, going through the state you came from because your ID is all from Michigan, but you're in the state of Oregon. Well, they're going to have to consult Michigan. You might not have a federal file. The FBI can't do an ID check on you if you haven't been investigated by the FBI or turned in your paperwork. I applied for and got a clearance at one time. The FBI is supposed to have my data. The people who do your passports have to have your fingerprints and data. But guess what? On a federal level, after a certain number of years, they're required to destroy those records, so they may not have them. And they may be legally forbidden from having them because a bunch of laws were passed because people kind of got paranoid about the FBI keeping a file on everybody. You think? But it was including but not limited to FBI fingerprint, criminal background check, and identification system. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, if it does this, has to return the fingerprint cards and evidence so that they can't keep it on record because they say they can't. Why? Because they've been mandated not to. Unless you're a criminal they have to keep a record on, they have to destroy the records that they're in and or return them back to you. And the city and county you're in probably has laws like that too. In fact, you can ask police, are you required to erase information about me if no criminal charges are filed and I'm not considered a suspect after a year or two? And they'll say, almost always, they say, yeah, after 5 years we have to. Number one, we don't want to. Number two, we don't need it. Number three, it's illegal. Virtually every city, county, and state you run into has like a 5-year rule or a 2-year rule. Why? Because we the people told them that because we don't want them keeping tabs on everybody. Better that they can't identify you because you did nothing and should assume that to maintain innocent until proven guilty. Does the FBI provide arrest records at the request of private citizens? This is from the FBI website. Yes. If you're the one we're doing the background check on, you can request your records. We don't provide it to someone else, except under, and this is not mentioned by either side that was lying about it, a court order or a request you fill out. What do you mean? If I'm applying for a permit to concealed carry or just have a permit to purchase a gun, I'm filling out the FBI form giving them permission to give my data to me and or an agent. The agent I'm telling them to give it to is the police department because I'm asking them to give it to the police department. That's what that, to secondary person or third party, yeah, police department. Purpose, background check. It just says background check. It doesn't say anything about a purchase permit. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has refused outright to do purchase permit criminal background checks with fingerprints. So said the OregonFirearms.org, the Oregon State Police, OSP, the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, OSSA, and the Oregon Chiefs of Police, OACP. They all said that because they cite no agent can issue a firearm permit purchase unless the state police reports, it can be any police. The state police reports you have successfully passed only one thing, an FBI fingerprint background check, and the FBI has refused to do so. No, they didn't. They said that you have to have the applicant fill it out, and you're just getting it because he says you're allowed to. The same as I would do if I was trying to do the same thing, which I've done, so the FBI would give it to my boss because I had to have a secured permit and a secured status so we could get bonded. Why would all the pro-gun people lie about this? And then the conspiracy theorists lie about it because they hear bullshit. And then the people who are against firearms say, well, this is perfect because they believe the bullshit they were fed by their opposition. No, an FBI criminal background check involving fingerprints is not a requirement to get a permit to purchase in the state of Oregon under 114. That refusal was a bullshit lie and them going out of their way to misinterpret the hell out of it. And there's no punishment. Both sides can lie about this. And you'd better accept that they did. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with it.